came on Daystar and you publicly affirmed their relationship as being of the Lord. Can you do that in good conscience without having talking to Lisa to get her side of the story?
I don't care. The great thing about being my age is I just don't care. I've got a good quality of life.
Jimmy Evans stunned everyone with a statement no one saw coming. After years of silence and speculation, he finally spoke out about Joni Lamb, and what he revealed has left fans speechless. Secrets, tension, and truth are now flooding the spotlight. If you thought you knew the story, think again. This changes everything. What did Jimmy say? Why now? And what does it mean for Joni's legacy? Buckle up. The most shocking moment just hit the airwaves. For years, Jimmy Evans stayed quiet. He didn't comment, didn't post, didn't even hint at what he truly thought about what was happening behind the scenes at Daystar. To most people, he was just a trusted friend of the Lamb family, someone who showed up for guest sermons, taught about marriage, and stood by Joni after Marcus passed away. But then, everything changed. Just days ago, a private conversation leaked, and it revealed a side of Jimmy Evans that no one expected. The silence was over, and what he said is shaking the very foundation of the Christian media world. In the leaked audio, Jimmy describes a moment that still haunts him. A meeting inside Daystar where the energy felt wrong from the very beginning. He said it wasn't peaceful or spiritual. It was tense, controlled, and unsettling. He sat across from Jonathan Lamb and his wife Susie, both looking emotionally worn down. Then came the moment that shocked him. Someone asked Jimmy to convince Jonathan to submit to his mother. Not honor, not respect, but full spiritual obedience. As if Joni herself was God's chosen voice, not just in the home, but over her grown son's life. Jimmy hesitated. He didn't want to do it, but he went along with it, repeating the idea that inside Daystar, Joni was the one speaking for God. That's the part that won't go away. Because those words, Joni is the voice of God, carried weight. They weren't just about a mother and son. They were about power, spiritual authority, control. Jimmy didn't scream, he didn't argue, but he said it, and Jonathan and Susie never forgot. That meeting became a breaking point, not only for them, but for everyone who knew what really went down. Now Jimmy is trying to explain himself. Friends say he's regretful, that he's finally realizing how twisted things had become, that the push to silence Jonathan, to protect the ministry at any cost, wasn't holy. It was harmful. He thought he was helping, but deep down, he knew something was off. And now that the truth is coming out, Jimmy can't go back. He's no longer just a guest preacher. He's a witness to what was happening behind the scenes, and his silence only helped keep the mask on longer. But the mask is falling.
Being bold to speak the truth and to not be a part of a cover-up, and that's led us to where we are now completely free, not attached to any sort of major institution or any type of controls, to where we're able to be a voice for truth and to be able to stand up against injustice and be a voice for others out there who are have been through abuse or been through a difficulty or been part of a culture that encourages people to cover things up. We're so excited that we can help be a force that can shine the light on the darkness and allow the Lord to do a cleansing work in the body of Christ. So thank you all for all the people that have written to us and supported us and loved on us. It's really just been so overwhelming.
It was supposed to be a peaceful conversation, a time to heal, a time for the Lamb family to come together, face their pain, and maybe, just maybe, find a way forward. But what happened that day ended up changing everything. Not just for the family, but for the people who had followed them for years, watched their broadcasts, prayed with them on television, and believed in the image of a united Christian household. Behind the scenes, though, that image had already started to crack. And at this family meeting, the truth finally spilled out. Jonathan Lamb and his wife Susie had been quiet for a long time. Too long. They had watched from the sidelines as Joni moved on quickly after Marcus's death. Faster than anyone expected. They had sat through awkward meetings, dodged questions from viewers, and tried to hold themselves together as everything around them felt like it was falling apart. But this time, they couldn't hold back anymore. They needed answers, they needed truth, and they were ready to speak up, no matter the cost. So Jonathan called for a family meeting, not in a boardroom, not with cameras, just face to face. Everyone was invited, siblings, spouses, trusted voices. And surprisingly, Joni showed up. For a moment, there was hope. Maybe she was finally ready to listen. Maybe she'd sit down, open her heart, and admit that things had gone off course. But that moment didn't last long. As the meeting started, Jonathan explained why he called it. He talked about the tension in the family, the growing distance, the silence that was breaking them apart. He asked everyone to share their thoughts, their hurts, their concerns. Not to attack, but to be honest. One by one, voices began to speak. Some were calm, others emotional, but all of them had one thing in common. They missed the family they once knew. Then came Joni's turn. Instead of sitting quietly and listening, she did something no one expected. She pulled out her phone and set a timer. "You each have 60 seconds, she said. "After that, I'm done." At first, people thought she was joking, but she wasn't. 1 minute per person. That's all she gave them. 1 minute to explain years of confusion, hurt, betrayal, and spiritual disillusionment. 1 minute to say everything that had built up since Marcus's death. And when the last person spoke, she stood up, looked around the room, and said they were all operating in fear. Then she walked out.
Your concern is to do what she says, and if you can't be here.
No, it is my concern.
No, Jonathan, you keep arguing with everything. You got to stop.
I'm not arguing.
You're arguing with everything. You've got to stop. And it has to end with both of you acknowledging her authority. She is God's voice to you here on this property and related to Daystar Network. She is God's voice. You submit or you leave. That's really the truth.
I mean, there will be a viewer comment the next time y'all are on about Doug. So you either submit and read it or you leave. And there's not going to be any in between.
Just like that. No hugs, no prayers, no follow-up. She had a flight to catch. To New York, to see Doug Weiss, the man she married just months after Marcus passed. And with that, Joni left the room and, for many, left the family emotionally for good. What followed was silence. Stunned silence. Jonathan looked around the room and realized what had just happened. His mother wasn't ready to talk. She wasn't interested in making peace. She had made up her mind. And worse, she had chosen to walk away from the people who loved her most. That day, something shifted permanently. The Lamb family wasn't just divided, they were fractured. In the days that followed, Susie couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. She had always been careful, always respectful, but something in her had finally snapped. She began to speak up more publicly, though still measured. She and Jonathan stopped appearing on Daystar broadcasts altogether. Their silence was no longer out of loyalty. It was out of survival. Behind the scenes, more people were beginning to distance themselves. Close friends of the family started stepping back. Some reached out quietly, offering support to Jonathan and Susie, saying they saw what was happening but didn't know how to stop it. Others, like longtime family friend Denise Boggs, went even further. Denise, who had been part of the ministry for years and had counseled both Marcus and Joni in the past, wrote a deeply personal letter. She begged Joni to reconsider her path, to slow down, to seek God's voice, not just her own will. But Joni wasn't listening. To her, the ministry was fine. Her decisions were justified. Her marriage to Doug Weiss was part of God's plan, and anyone who disagreed, even her own son, was seen as rebellious or lost. That rigid mindset is what pushed the family further apart. The people who had once worked together to build a Christian media empire were no longer even speaking. The studio where they once prayed together now felt like a battleground, not of faith, but of control. And in the middle of it all was that family meeting, the moment when everything could have turned around, but instead fell apart. Jonathan and Susie left that meeting not just heartbroken, but changed. They understood now that things wouldn't go back to the way they were. They couldn't pretend anymore. And the truth that had been hidden for so long, about Marcus, about Joni, about the inner circle of Daystar, was beginning to surface. What was once a ministry built on family had now become a cautionary tale, and the people who had once smiled together on screen were now on opposite sides of a silent war. A war between truth and image, between healing and power. And it all started, or ended, in that one fateful family meeting. There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after. For the Lamb family, that moment came when a dark, long-buried secret finally resurfaced, one that had quietly poisoned their foundation for years, and once it was out, there was no going back. Not to the love, not to the trust, not to the image they had built on stage in front of millions. Because behind the lights, the music, the worship, and the smiles, there was something much heavier, something that had been silenced for too long. With Jonathan, he had always been known as the calm one, steady, loyal, faithful to both his family and the mission of Daystar. But years before Marcus passed, something happened that shook him to the core. Something so personal, so horrifying, that it nearly destroyed his ability to stay silent. Jonathan believed a family member had harmed his young daughter, not emotionally, not spiritually, but physically, the kind of harm no parent should ever have to confront. He didn't wait. He confronted the situation head-on, the way any loving father would. He spoke out, he asked questions, he demanded answers, and more than anything, he expected his parents, Marcus and Joni, to stand by his side, to believe him, to protect their granddaughter. But what he got instead was denial, silence, and a decision that would change his relationship with them forever. Marcus, the patriarch of Daystar, brushed it off. He said an internal investigation had cleared the family member. No police, no deep questioning, just a quiet conclusion behind closed doors. Case closed. Jonathan was told to move on. But in his heart, he knew nothing had truly been resolved. His daughter's pain was swept under the rug, and worse, he was now seen as the problem for refusing to accept it. Joni didn't believe him either. She stood by Marcus, stood by the accused, and refused to even consider that her son might be telling the truth. That betrayal hurt more than anything. Jonathan didn't just feel unheard, he felt abandoned. The woman who raised him, who taught him the Bible, who preached about protecting the innocent, had turned her back on her own granddaughter. From that point on, something between them broke. Years passed. The issue wasn't spoken of again, at least not publicly. Jonathan and Susie tried to carry on, but the wound never healed, and when Marcus died, everything unraveled faster than anyone could have imagined. Joni didn't slow down to grieve. She didn't sit with her children or talk through the unresolved pain. Instead, she moved forward. Fast. Too fast. And just 2 months after losing her husband, she was already planning a wedding with Doug Weiss. To many, that marriage seemed odd, too sudden, too convenient. But to Jonathan and Susie, it was more than just a strange decision. It was a clear sign that Joni had fully closed the door on the past, that she had no intention of revisiting the pain they'd all buried, and that made one thing clear to them. It was time to speak. That's why, when Jimmy Evans was brought in for what was supposed to be a healing meeting, things only got worse. Instead of addressing the past, Jonathan was asked to submit to his mother, not just respect her, not just hear her out, but to obey her, like she was the voice of God. That moment wasn't about reconciliation, it was about control. And for Jonathan, it was the final straw. The truth about what happened to his daughter was never acknowledged. The investigation was never reopened. And when Susie and Jonathan dug deeper, they discovered things were missed. Big things. Things that could have changed everything had someone actually taken the time to care. But they didn't. And the person who should have cared most, Joni, refused to listen. Again, the fallout from that secret didn't just stay within the family. It spread. Denise Boggs, a longtime friend of the ministry and someone who had once counseled Joni and Marcus, found out about the situation. She was horrified. She had supported the family for years, stood on stages with them, prayed with them. But this was too much. Denise wrote a letter, a powerful, emotional plea to Joni and the rest of the family. In it, she didn't just express concern. She issued a warning. She said Joni was being influenced, that Doug Weiss, the man she rushed to marry, was not who he appeared to be. She called him a wolf in sheep's clothing. She said Daystar was being used by the enemy to mock what God had built. And she begged Joni to stop before it was too late. But Joni didn't stop. She didn't respond. And once again, she walked away, not just from her children, but from anyone who dared to challenge the narrative she had created. Jonathan was left to deal with the aftermath. Susie was left to carry the weight. And their daughter, the one at the center of it all, was left with a truth no child should have to bear. That secret, that silence, didn't just break the family. It exposed everything. The smiles on TV, the sermons about love and unity, the image of a perfect Christian home, it all began to feel fake. Not because the faith wasn't real, but because the pain had been ignored for so long. And now the truth is coming out, slowly, painfully, but clearly. The people who once stood arm in arm on stage are now miles apart. Some by choice, some by heartbreak, but all because of one thing: the refusal to face what really happened. For many viewers, this revelation was shocking. But for those close to the Lambs, it explained everything. Why Jonathan stepped away. Why Susie stopped appearing on broadcasts. Why Joni seemed more defensive and isolated than ever. It all traced back to that buried secret, the one no one wanted to admit, but everyone now sees for what it really was. A family that once preached truth was undone by the truth they refused to face. And in that process, everything that made them strong, their unity, their faith, their integrity, was fractured beyond recognition. The Lamb family didn't fall apart overnight. It happened piece by piece, silence by silence, decision by decision, until all that was left was distance, distrust, and a legacy built on both inspiration and heartbreak. It didn't happen all at once. The collapse came slowly at first, so quietly that most people didn't even notice. At least, not at first. The smiles were still there, the lights still bright, the sermons kept coming, and the messages still sounded hopeful. But behind the scenes, the heart of the ministry was starting to fall apart, and by the time people realized what was really going on, it was too late. What had once been a thriving Christian platform built on faith, family, and integrity was now cracking under the weight of pride, secrets, and control. Daystar wasn't just a TV network. For many families, it was a source of comfort, a spiritual home, a reminder that even in a messy world, God's word was still being preached by people who lived what they believed. And at the center of that image was Joni Lamb. For years, she stood on stage next to Marcus, reading scripture, sharing personal stories, talking about marriage and motherhood, and smiling through every broadcast. Viewers trusted her. They prayed with her. They believed in her. But the truth behind the curtain told a very different story. When Marcus Lamb passed away, many people grieved deeply. He had been a symbol of strength, of consistency. But just as the world was mourning, something unexpected happened. Joni moved on. Fast. And not just emotionally. She began making decisions that blindsided even those closest to her. Within months, she announced her relationship with Doug Weiss. To the public, it seemed like a whirlwind romance, but to insiders it was more than that. It was a signal that something had shifted. People began asking questions. Why so soon? Why Doug? And why was everything being kept so quiet behind the scenes? At first, no one got answers. Joni remained composed. She stayed on camera. She kept preaching. But the people who had once worked beside her were disappearing. Jonathan Lamb, her own son, stepped away. His wife Susie stopped appearing altogether. Close friends, even ministry partners like Denise Boggs, began to distance themselves. And when a few of them tried to reach out, to offer private concern, they were either ignored or dismissed. Still, Joni stayed the course. She doubled down. Those who questioned her decisions were told they were walking in fear. Those who dared to speak out were seen as disloyal, and in some cases, even accused of rebellion. But the truth was, they weren't trying to rebel, they were trying to protect what they thought the ministry stood for. Because Daystar wasn't supposed to be about image, it was supposed to be about Jesus. And yet more and more, it began to feel like it was about Joni. The moment that made everything worse was the leaked conversation involving Jimmy Evans, a man who had been part of the Lamb's inner circle for years. When it came out that he had told Jonathan to submit to his mother, to obey her as the voice of God inside the ministry, people were stunned. This wasn't just a spiritual disagreement. This was about control, power. The idea that someone could stand on a stage, preach the gospel, and then behind closed doors demand obedience that bordered on idolatry. That one conversation confirmed what many had feared. The ministry wasn't just fractured, it was being controlled by one voice. And if you weren't in agreement, you were out. From there, the silence grew louder. Jonathan and Susie walked away, not out of bitterness, but because they couldn't pretend anymore. Their decision wasn't made lightly. It came after years of prayer, confrontation, and heartbreak. But at some point, they realized the image was more important than the truth. And that's when they knew it was time to go. And they weren't alone. Staff members started quietly resigning. Supporters who had donated for years pulled back. Pastors who once appeared on Daystar turned down invitations. Even longtime friends of Marcus began speaking in private about their concerns. What had once felt like a movement of God now felt like a platform built to protect pride and silence the wounded. And the deeper people looked, the more they found. Stories about unresolved family issues, allegations of spiritual manipulation, decisions being made without counsel, and Joni's increasing alignment with Doug Weiss, a man who had his own complicated past, including a sudden divorce and questions about his integrity, only made it worse. Still, Daystar kept broadcasting, Joni kept smiling, but something had shifted in the spirit of the place. People could feel it. The transparency was gone. The unity was gone. The heart of the ministry was no longer beating with the same rhythm it once had, and now the consequences are catching up. What happens when a ministry built on image starts to crumble? What happens when the people you trusted most turn out to be hiding the most? It doesn't just cause public embarrassment, it causes spiritual confusion. It shakes the faith of people who looked up to you. It creates doubt. And worst of all, it wounds the very people you were supposed to protect. That's what's happening now. Daystar isn't collapsing because the world is attacking it. It's collapsing because the truth is finally breaking through the surface. Because people who were silenced are now speaking. Because family members who were pushed out are finally being heard. And because the weight of what was hidden for years can no longer be ignored. The collapse isn't dramatic or sudden. It's quiet, it's emotional, it's spiritual, and it's real. This isn't about Joni being evil. It's not about blaming one person. It's about what happens when image becomes more important than accountability, when silence is used as a tool of control, when spiritual authority is twisted into personal power, and when healing is replaced with performance. For the viewers, the followers, the believers, this moment is painful, but it's also necessary. Because no matter how beautiful something looks on the outside, if the inside is crumbling, eventually the truth will rise. And that's what we're seeing now. The truth rising, slowly, painfully, but boldly. The image is fading, and what's left behind, that's what will determine if there's still something worth saving.